Muy buenos días.
Good morning, to all delegates, ladies and gentlemen. The 13th plenary meeting of the substantive session of the United Nations Conference to negotiate a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons leading towards their total elimination is called to order.
Como les comenté el día de ayer,
as we heard yesterday, we have inspirational video prepared by the Future of Life Institute pertaining to the work of this conference. It contains an inspirational message, and before we continue, we'll be able to watch it. It'll take 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and resume, and then I'll explain how we'll be proceeding today.
Scientists from around the world have come together in support of a ban on nuclear weapons. Nuclear arms are the only weapons of mass destruction not yet prohibited by an international convention, even though they are the most destructive and indiscriminate weapons ever created. And scientists bear a special responsibility for nuclear weapons, since it was scientists who invented them and who discovered that their effects are even more horrific than first thought.
Nuclear weapons represent one of the greatest threats to our civilization and to all life on Earth.
As said, nuclear weapons are the only weapons of mass destruction not yet prohibited by an international convention. Now, this is the moment for such a convention.
To me, the idea of having countries of the world get together and decide to ban nuclear weapons in the same way they've had conventions to ban chemical weapons, biological weapons, and other things makes a tremendous amount of sense.
Over a decade ago, George Shultz convened a meeting at Stanford. At that meeting, we reflected back on the Reykjavik summit meeting, where Reagan and Gorbachev discussed the possibility of a total elimination of nuclear weapons. Our meeting at Stanford was to determine whether it was worth revisiting that idea, and we concluded that it was.
As a physicist at MIT, I believe that things only start moving when you apply force to them. So I strongly support your efforts at the UN to build momentum for nuclear disarmament.
Not banning nuclear weapons or deferring the decision to later generations will render the situation highly unstable or metastable, as we physicists say.
It's something that is long overdue, but the sooner we can do it, the better, because it will make the world a far safer place.
There's nothing more tempting to induce violence than to have powerful weapons in the hands of people who may not have complete responsibility for the significance of those weapons.
I'm Stephen Pinker. I am a professor of psychology at Harvard University, and I support the ban.
And I support the ban treaty because the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty has not succeeded in getting the nuclear weapon states to hold up their part of the bargain.
So I'm strongly in support of an international ban on nuclear weapons.
I support the ban on all nuclear weapons for the future of our planet.
Today, the United Nations is considering a ban on nuclear weapons. The political effect of that ban is by no means clear, but the moral effect is quite clear. What we are saying is there ought to be a ban on nuclear weapons.
Individual explosions can obliterate cities. Radioactive fallout can contaminate regions. And a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse may cause mayhem by frying electrical grids and electronics across a continent.
The preamble to the ban treaty mentions the humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons as a reason to ban them. If we use nuclear weapons, we can produce a nuclear winter, sentencing most of the planet to starvation from the effects of the smoke.
Fires from burning cities where the weapons explode rises high into the atmosphere. The smoke blocks sunlight. As a consequence, the planet cools off so much that agriculture is damaged, which would lead to mass starvation on the planet and probably kill a large fraction of the people all over the world, even outside the combatant countries.
Even a very small nuclear war would cause tremendous disruption to the world's food supply.
If we want to avoid the dangers of nuclear war, the dangers of accidental nuclear explosions, and the incredible cost to upgrade and keep a huge nuclear arsenal, we need to disarm.
The only solution to this problem is to get rid of nuclear weapons.
I support the ban treaty.
I completely support a ban.
I support the proposed ban on nuclear weapons.
A nuclear war is more likely than one may hope, because it can start by mistake, miscalculation, or terrorist provocation. There is a steady stream of accidents and false alarms that could trigger all-out war, and relying on never-ending luck is not a sustainable strategy. But the UN negotiations to ban nuclear weapons offer a new source of optimism. Over 3,700 scientists from 100 countries have signed an open letter in support of the ban and urging their governments to do the same, because nuclear weapons threaten not merely those who have them, but all people on Earth.
As a mother and scientist, I wish you good luck with the negotiations. The world and future generations depend on your success.
Quisiera agradecerle.
I'd like to thank the Future of Life Institute for that work. Clearly it was a major, they went to great lengths to bring to the conference this inspirational, valuable message in our work. And I hope you all found it duly inspirational as well. The conference will now continue its consideration of Agenda Item 9, Cluster 1, Preamble. And I take the opportunity, as the second day of our work gets underway, to make a quick recap, make a couple of comments on the vision of the presidency on how we'll be proceeding in this session. First, I'd like to reiterate my thanks to all delegations who have actively participated yesterday. I want to commend the constructive dynamic that we had yesterday, the constructive impetus that allowed us to make great progress. This morning we'll be continuing the first reading of the preamble. We'll be concluding the reading of the preamble, and I hope will be then that will then start first reading of Article 1 on general obligations. Now, just to reiterate, so that we're all on the same wavelength, this is the first stage of this session, which is a first reading of the first draft. Now, I am aware that once we finish the first reading, we'll then be entering a new stage, a stage where we'll be negotiating. Once we conclude the first reading, I will carry out an assessment, take stock, and I'll be proposing methodology to follow in the second stage, based on a new revised version of the text that is the product of the first reading. I'm also aware that we will today be starting to analyze and read a set of articles that are of major complexity, and we'd like to take the opportunity, build on the fact that we've made significant progress yesterday, to go through the preamble again, and having conducted consultations with the Secretariat, so that we can, at the start of next week, on Monday, so that we can have a new version of the preamble, with which we could then move forward, carry out informal consultations to help us move forward, continuing with a reading in the plenary, continuing consideration of the first draft, but always building on this productive working session that would allow us to have an updated, revised version of the text of the preamble. Therefore, I'd like to ask you, since we're working on the weekend, I'd like to ask delegations to very much participate, as they did yesterday, with new proposals, new paragraphs. I want to reiterate my call that we heard at the end of yesterday, that we can approach delegations that have interest on the same themes so that those proposals can be brought forward through negotiations with other delegations who have shown a significant level of common ground and convergence of any proposals that have been put forward. That way, once we receive those proposals during the course of the day, which are pending, which you're going to be sending to us by email, that way we can then receive them with a high level of cohesion between you so that they can be properly calibrated. And so, if I may, I would like to now resume the list of speakers that was pending from yesterday. We're reviewing the articles, the paragraphs of the preamble that are related to that cluster. And that are related to the general theme of institutions and disarmament, so as to conclude that theme, and then move to consideration of paragraphs 13 and 14. Now we're doing paragraphs 7 to 12 of the preamble, and yesterday we had left over on the speakers list through 13 delegations. I'll read out the list of delegations who still wish to take the floor. So the Philippines, Egypt, Mozambique, Indonesia, New Zealand, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Ecuador, Brazil, State of Palestine, Sweden, Thailand, and Iran. Then I'd like now to give the floor to the delegation of the Philippines.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me start by saying that my delegation is pleased with the pace of the deliberation yesterday. We are pleased with the pace of the deliberation yesterday, as well as the quality of the interventions. We hope we will have the same significant progress today, especially today being Friday. On the Cuban delegation's suggestion to strengthen PP 12, let me recall that ASEAN in its general statement yesterday also expressed support for strengthening of paragraph 12 by including reference to Article 6 of the NPT and the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice of 8 July 1996 on the legality of the threat or use of nuclear weapons, and which established the legal obligation on all state parties to the NPT to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to nuclear disarmament. On PP 14, the Philippines is pleased that there is reference to the efforts of the ICRC, civil society, and the Hibakushu over the total elimination of nuclear weapons. We would like to add, however, the victims of nuclear testing to this paragraph. Thank you, Madam President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to the delegation of the Philippines. I give the floor now to the delegation of Egypt.
Thank you, Madam President, and good morning to you and all delegations. With regards to the cluster on nuclear disarmament, my delegation would like to propose 2 new paragraphs and suggest some amendments to 2 other paragraphs, PP9 and PP10. First, with regards to the new paragraphs, the first new paragraph would be a PP7 bis. And the intention of the new paragraph is to reflect a dissatisfaction with the level of progress and pace with nuclear disarmament. We believe that reference to such discontent is important, since this entire process of drafting a new convention on prohibiting nuclear weapons would have been needless if we had witnessed serious and systematic progress of nuclear disarmament over the past decades. This dissatisfaction needs to be reflected because since the entry into force of the NPT, nuclear weapons continue to exist with staggering numbers, and the process of disarmament remains elusive as ever. We therefore suggest the following new paragraph as a PP7 bis. I quote, "Gravely concerned with the lack of substantial and meaningful progress in nuclear disarmament and determined to achieve the total elimination of nuclear weapons." End of quote. Therefore, we believe a reference to our concern with the lack of progress in nuclear disarmament is imperative. The second new paragraph which we are suggesting is PP12 bis, and it is actually not necessarily related to the disarmament cluster, but we are suggesting it here anyway because its relevance is more convenient in this cluster than any of the other clusters in the preamble, whether the cluster on humanitarian consequences or the cluster on international humanitarian law. The new paragraph is related to our objection to the continued reliance on nuclear weapons in security and military doctrines and can be read as follows. Quote, "Deeply concerned with the continued reliance on nuclear weapons and disturbed that the concept of nuclear deterrence continues to feature in security and military alliances, security and military doctrines." Again, the point here is that as much as we are here to create a new international norm for the prohibition of nuclear weapons, we need to address a collective rejection of how these abhorrent weapons continue to feature highly in the security and military doctrines of states. We had previously raised this point in our session back in March and look forward to its incorporation in the draft text. But we are flexible with the placement of this new paragraph. If there is suggestions that we should move it elsewhere in the preamble, we are willing to consider it. With regards to the 2 paragraphs that we are suggesting to amend, they are PP9 and PP10. PP9, we suggest that it would be amended as follows, stressing the urgent need to undertake immediate measures of nuclear disarmament in order to achieve the total elimination of nuclear arsenals, so not just facilitate, but to achieve the total elimination of national arsenals of nuclear weapons and the means of their delivery, and determined to act towards that end. Therefore, we are suggesting that PP10 would be deleted and that determined to act towards that end would be the last sentence in PP9. I thank you, Madam President.
Muchas gracias a la delegación de Egipto.
Many thanks to the delegation of Egypt. I now give the floor to Mozambique.
Thank you very much, Madam President. 3 small points. First, I would like to just agree with the outline you just made about how to proceed our work, and my delegation supports that. Secondly, I would like to agree with those who have said that the advisory opinion of the ICJ finds a place in our text. We can see how we will draft it, but it is very important that we go along with that idea. Thirdly, it is regarding PP7. PP7 and PP10 are the shortest preamble paragraphs we have in the text. Probably it is too early to suggest how we can arrange these paragraphs. But I would like to draw the attention of distinguished delegations that this PP7 speaks of purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations. And if we read the Charter, we will find that the purpose and principle are contained in Articles 1 and 2. Therefore, my suggestion, which may be premature at this stage, but I would like that it be retained, is to place this PP7 as the first preamble paragraph, because it contains important message, vision of the United Nations, and we need to bear that in mind and not to place it just in the middle, lost in the middle of our text. This is my small proposal. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Ambassador. I now give the floor to the delegation of Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam President, and good morning, everyone. First of all, allow me to commend you, Madam Chair, in the way and the method in which you have guided us in this conference yesterday and also up until today, and also commend the spirit in which was displayed by our colleagues here yesterday and as well as today. And I hope that the spirit of collegiality will be sustained up until the very end. So I'd like to congratulate you on that, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, on this particular section, we recall that there was a very constructive proposal that was tabled by the distinguished delegation of Cuba as well as South Africa. And we would like to support their proposals, their new language in the paragraphs that were proposed yesterday. And equally, I would like to endorse the proposal of a new paragraph that was just read by the distinguished delegation of Egypt. I think we concur with their proposal very strongly, because we have mentioned this in the beginning yesterday, that we need to do our utmost to delegitimize the concept of nuclear deterrence. So this is in line with what we have been pointed out since yesterday, that we need not only to delegitimize a nuclear weapon as an object, but we also need to delegitimize nuclear deterrence as a concept. So with this in mind, we fully and strongly support the proposal that have just been made. Next, Madam Chair, I'd like to proceed with PP8. And we do have a proposal under PP8. PP8, as of now, stands PP8 is now, we feel, is very sufficient, but we are of the view that there needs to be a more stronger and more proactive spirit in this preamble paragraph. Therefore, we would like to propose an amendment. While we agree with the proposal to include legally that was made by the delegation of Cuba, we would like to make this paragraph even more firm and more active. So we would like to replace would with will. And then we would like to replace comprehensive nuclear disarmament, which in hindsight is a very good concept, but we like to make it more definite. So we would like to replace that with achieving and maintaining a world without nuclear weapons. So the last, so in total the paragraph would read as follows: bearing in mind that the prohibition of nuclear weapons will be an important contribution towards achieving and maintaining a world without nuclear weapons. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks to the delegation of Indonesia. I now give the floor to the delegation of New Zealand.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And like others here, we strongly agree with your proposed approach for the way ahead that you announced at the outset of our meeting this morning. I asked for the floor yesterday afternoon to convey New Zealand's two proposals that we wished to put forward under this nuclear disarmament cluster. And I'd like now to slightly change them in the light of the useful comments and suggestions made by other delegations since. Our first proposal relates to paragraph 8 and paragraph 9, and we were wanting to suggest a merger of the two. Our merger would have read, bearing in mind that the prohibition of nuclear weapons would be an important contribution towards comprehensive nuclear disarmament and the total elimination of nuclear weapons. We heard the proposal put yesterday afternoon by Cuba to insert a reference to legally binding before prohibition, and we're certainly very happy to support that language. Similarly, the suggestion just made usefully now by Indonesia regarding the addition to the end of the preamble, that is the same really as the suggestion we were making about referencing the total elimination of nuclear weapons. We would think, though, that there was merit to retain the reference, as it is in PP8, about comprehensive nuclear disarmament and graft onto that the reference either as in Indonesia's language to a nuclear weapon-free world, or as a New Zealand suggestion referencing last year's General Assembly mandate, referencing the total elimination of nuclear weapons. We can be flexible on this, and I think, Madam President, it's clear that there's a convergence in approach to these PP8 and PP9 texts. Our second suggestion, Madam President, is in relation to preambular paragraph 12, and we had wanted to include a very specific reference to the source of that famous quotation in PP12, and of course to acknowledge that it was language drawn from the 1996 advisory opinion of the International Court. Cuba got in ahead of us yesterday afternoon, and we agree with the suggestion made by the Cuban delegation. Our own suggestion would have been to reference the ICJ's advisory opinion at the outset of the paragraph rather than as Cuba did at the end. But again, we can be flexible, and we note that either approach works well. We will nonetheless forward our own suggestion for a reference to it at the outset. Finally, beyond those two proposals that New Zealand would like to put forward, we would like to strongly endorse the suggestion made just now by the Ambassador of Mozambique that PP7 should be moved forward to PP1, given the importance to us all of the UN Charter as our founding document. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks, New Zealand. I now give the floor to the delegation of Switzerland.
Sorry, I was actually taking the floor regarding PP13, so I asked too early for the floor. Blame the jet lag. I'll get back once we get to PP13.
Muchas gracias, Swiss.
Many thanks, Switzerland. I think that we're all much more awake than we were yesterday, but we do understand the jet lag and that situation. I now give the floor to the delegation of Liechtenstein.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Also, from our side, we're very grateful for your outline of the way ahead, which is ambitious and reflective of the very constructive spirit that we have in the room, and you certainly have our full support for that. On the cluster under discussion, we also have two drafting proposals. The first concerns PP8. The way it is currently drafted, in our view, it contains an ambiguity that I think we should be able to avoid, and our drafting proposal would be to simply rearranged the paragraph a little bit so it reads better. The proposal from our side would read, bearing in mind the important contribution of the prohibition of nuclear weapons towards comprehensive nuclear disarmament. That proposal, in our view, can be very well combined with the many other good proposals that have been expressed to strengthen this paragraph. In particular, I would also from our side support the Cuban addition on the legally binding nature of the prohibition, and also the proposals by Indonesia, supported also by New Zealand at the end of this paragraph. The second drafting proposal, we had the paragraph 12. We would have a preference at the beginning to affirm or reaffirm not that there exists an obligation, but rather to say reaffirming the existing obligation. And again, also in that paragraph, we are supportive of proposals by other delegations to strengthen it, and to refer here also to the ICJ opinion. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thanks to the delegation of Liechtenstein. I now give the floor to the delegation of Ecuador. Many thanks, President. Good morning to you and to everyone else here. Thank you for the excellent way in which you have conducted today's work. I should begin by recognizing something and acknowledging something, and that is the presence of the DPI of the United Nations, and acknowledge their work. The first week of meetings was not covered by the DPI, unfortunately. This week our meetings are being covered by them, and that should be acknowledged. Their work is important, and of course I would encourage the DPI to continue that coverage of our meeting until its very last day. Now, a number of comments on the paragraphs that we have before us this morning. We fully agree with the Cuban proposal to insert a paragraph which recalls the role of the General Assembly from its very first resolution. There is a specific, well, an Ecuadorian, I think, presented that resolution to the General Assembly in 1946. They were the first rapporteur of the Commission, and that resolution is highly relevant, as are the ones which followed afterwards. There is the language in that first resolution which here, which we also have in the treaty. We haven't perhaps taken stock of that, but in PP9, we talk about the elimination of nuclear weapons, national arsenals of nuclear weapons, more specifically. That language comes from the Resolution 1.1. There was reference made to atomic weapons, national arsenals. So that the language we have here mirrors that language from the first resolution, so the proposal made is a valid one. Now, the new proposals made a few minutes ago by Egypt regarding the lack of progress, and especially that which looks to delegitimize the nuclear deterrent doctrine, well, those proposals pertaining to those issues are valid and should be taken up and supported, we believe. Our colleague from Indonesia, as he usually does, made very valid comments regarding the intention to delegitimize nuclear deterrence. My delegation supports that proposal and those comments very clearly. There is a difference not only in terms of degree but also in terms of type and their essential characteristics. There's the conventional deterrence, whose aim is to deny the aggressor's capacity, limit that capacity to commit an attack, and then within the limits of conventional deterrence, the aim is to punish the aggressor. Nuclear deterrence is based on one single concept, and that is destroying until they're absolutely decimated, that is the aggressor, without bearing in mind consequences on human life. That's the only goal of an aggressor's attack. So this is an issue, I think, is one which will come up throughout our debates, but there should be no doubt we are entirely against the principle and doctrine of nuclear deterrence. Then we think there are interesting proposals on the table. They need to be worked on. And so at the end of this exercise, it will be very useful to come up with language which tries to merge, bring together various versions of wording, perhaps harmonise them. But there was the principle of putting legally binding in paragraph 8. That's entirely logical and falls in line with what we're doing here. My delegation, like other delegation, would prefer to change the verb in PP8, change would, we're in favour of constitute. That was a very good proposal from the state of Palatine, where there's also the option will. But whatever we choose, it needs to be unequivocal language and not the idea of a possibility. Now, PP9, there was a proposal made by Cuba to characterize the elimination of nuclear weapons. We're not talking about the accidental elimination, but we're talking about characteristics, the intrinsic nature of this concept, this idea of something being irreversible, verifiable, and transparent, and that needs to be properly reflected here. Now, paragraph 12, it's entirely appropriate in our view to reflect the notion of where this language comes from and recall that. And of course, that would bring us to refer to the advisory opinion of the ICJ of 1996. So perhaps a reference to that here. For the moment, they would be our comments. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks to the delegation of Ecuador. I now give the floor to the delegation of Brazil.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We also fully support you in your proposals for the way forward. We're satisfied to see that there's so much interest in the preamble. The preamble is growing quite fast, but I think a lot of the proposals are pointing in the same direction, and they can be, I think, dealt with in a way that would minimize expansion of text, and we could still have a reasonably complete but not too long preamble, which I think would be adequate to a treaty such as this one. There are many proposals that we can support. Of course, it's more difficult to support them just through hearing so many different language and not seeing them anywhere on the text or on the screen. But I understand that this is the methodology that is required for a first reading, so we're okay with that. It's not a problem. But of course, I may be supporting less than I can actually support because I'm not in a position now to remember all the different great proposals that were made. We would like to support the addition of the paragraph as proposed by Cuba that mentions the threat or use of force coming out of the Charter of the UN. So we think that's an important paragraph. I think placement, as the ambassador of Mozambique indicated, is something maybe for later. But of course, there could be a different order coming from the more general paragraphs to more specific ones. But that's something we're not going to get into right now. We would also like to suggest some amendment to PP 9. Notwithstanding, I think, the importance of Ecuador's contribution to this language back then, I think that today perhaps, and this is language that also appears in the preamble of the NPT, the language on elimination from national arsenals, but we think that if you go to Article 6 as such, which contains the sort of the commitment to disarmament within that particular treaty, I think it's a more direct language and a broader one. I think we should facilitate the total elimination of nuclear weapons. That would be a more direct and a broader way of saying it, because it's not just eliminating them from national arsenals. They shouldn't be kept anywhere else. I think it's eliminating them tout court, as they say in French. And we would strongly propose as well to delete means of their delivery, because this opens the door to a treaty in its own right regarding the means of delivery, and we already actually have agreements on that. So I think this is really outside the purview and not the objective of the mandate that we have. We're here to prohibit nuclear weapons. I think we should refrain from opening other doors that increases the complexity of our task, and that also will involve cross-references to additional other regimes. That something we would not wish to do right now because we think it would be counterproductive. Again, we are in a position to support the important contributions by Cuba and the new paragraphs by Egypt. Egypt's bis paragraphs that indicates a concern with lack of progress. Also the one on the continued reliance on nuclear weapons within deterrence doctrines, military and security doctrines. And I think that was also supported by Indonesia. We would also like to, in fact, support Indonesia's amendments to PP8, making the verb would, replacing it with a stronger one, such as will, or other such types of language, and replacing comprehensive nuclear disarmament with achieving and maintaining a world without nuclear weapons. So we would also fully support that particular proposal. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Many thanks, Brazil. I now give the floor to the State of Palestine.
Thank you, Madam President. The State of Palestine would like to support Mozambique's proposal to move PP7 to become PP1. We also expressed yesterday our support for the idea of adding the same preambular paragraph that we had at the end of the NPT, which refers to the fact that states must refrain from using force or threat of use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of states, along the lines of what South Africa also proposed. We also want to support Egypt's proposal for a PP7 bis, expressing dissatisfaction with level and pace of nuclear disarmament. We believe that's one of the main reasons we are here today. And we support proposals to strengthen PP8 and PP9. We had ourselves made some proposals in this regard. We want to support adding legally binding as proposed by Cuba. We agree with New Zealand on the importance of maintaining the language towards comprehensive nuclear disarmament, but would like to see then the addition made by Indonesia regarding achieving a world without nuclear weapons, which is a simple and strong formula about our objective. We had suggested replacing would be by constitutes, but and bearing in mind by stressing, but language proposed by others also is convenient, including the language proposed by Liechtenstein. As regards PP9, we support removing from national arsenals and maintaining elimination of nuclear weapons, as was suggested by Brazil just now, and the insertion of irreversible, verifiable, and transparent elimination. We believe that language is indeed important. Finally, on PP12, we support Cuba's and New Zealand's proposal and Ecuador's about referring to the ICJ advisory opinion. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now give the floor to the delegation of Sweden.
Thank you, Madam President. And like other delegations, we also appreciate and support the outline that you have made for the future of our work. First, I would like to turn to Preamble paragraph 9 and support the proposal made by Brazil, namely that we should delete the words "from national arsenals" and then also delete "and the means of their delivery." Then I would like to suggest two new preamble paragraphs, and we thought that they would fit best into this subcluster, but we are very flexible here. And I would also like to mention that the content of these paragraphs have been touched upon, and there have been suggestions made by other delegations, so it might very well be possible to merge them or to supplement other proposals. But I'll read them very quickly and then we'll submit them in writing as usual. The first one would read, recalling the importance for states with nuclear weapons to take practical steps to address the significant number of nuclear weapons that remain on high alert by reducing the risk of accidental use of nuclear weapons and further enhance transparency and increase mutual confidence in order to promote stability and security. The second proposal is much shorter, and that would read, concerned by the waste of resources resulting from the production and modernization of nuclear arsenals. Thank you.
Many thanks to the delegation of Sweden. I now give the floor to the delegation of Thailand.
I thank you, Madam President. Thailand would like to ally our statement with the distinguished delegates of the Philippines on this cluster delivered on behalf of ASEAN yesterday. I would like to reiterate as follows. Given the importance of the work of the UN and disarmament, we would like the inclusion of the first UNGA resolution adopted on 21st January 1946, in which our dear Ecuadorian diplomat presented this resolution. A paragraph to this extent was proposed by Cuba and we support it. We also would like a strengthened reference to the principle of the UN Charter in paragraph 7, including a reference to the peaceful settlement of disputes, the non-use of force or threat thereof, and the respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity, political independence, and non-interference in the domestic affairs of any state. We are flexible how this is incorporated into the text. It could also be done as proposed by the distinguished ambassador of Mozambique. Lastly, my delegation would like to also support the inclusion of reference to the objective to delegitimize nuclear weapons and its deterrence. Egyptian proposal reflects this. Thank you, Madam President.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks to the delegation of Thailand. I now give the floor to the delegation of Iran.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, on this cluster, starting from PP7, I have some observations as follows. On PP7, we have a general, paragraph which talks about the purpose and principles of Charter of the United Nations. We do believe that making this paragraph more relevant to the subject under consideration and make it clear that exactly which principles, of course, all principles of the Charter are important to us, but I think we need to specify mostly which one, are mostly are relevant to this document. So we suggest to mention here the reference bringing wording from Article 1 and 2 of the Charter of the United Nations, one part of those articles. So this paragraph should read as follows: determined to contribute to the realization of the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, in particular, quote, to maintain international peace and security, and to that end, to take effective collective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to the peace, and, quote, refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations, unquote. As I said, these are two quotations from Article 1 and 2 of the Charter of the United Nations. I would like to support the suggestions made by the Distinguished Ambassador of Cuba on insertion of adding two paragraphs referring to the resolution of the General Assembly and the SSOD1 final document. The suggestion made by distinguished representative of Egypt on adding two paragraphs regarding the showing dissatisfaction of the lack of progress on nuclear disarmament and nuclear deterrence doctrines are valid points, and we support them because, you know, first of all, showing dissatisfaction regarding the lack of progress is a state of the fact. Unfortunately, during last 50, 60 years ago, we haven't seen even one single verifiable achievement on nuclear disarmament. And regarding the doctrines, also we have to delegitimize this concept also. On PP8, we do support the position of Malaysia, Guatemala, and Indonesia in making this paragraph more strengthened and firm. So we have a wording to be suggested here, which would read as follows. PP8 can be like this: recognizing that the complete and effective prohibition of nuclear weapons will be, this is the suggestion of Indonesia, a necessary step in achieving comprehensive nuclear disarmament and maintaining a world free of nuclear weapons. I will give to you the suggestion in written form. On PP9, Madam President, I do agree with Brazil and Sweden that referring to means of delivery here is completely misleading and make it complicated and can be abused. It is not the relevant place for this because in the context of the NPT, you know, it has been introduced in totally different context. And I think here we need to focus on the essence of the point that we want to say here, which is the taking effective measures to achieve nuclear disarmament. So we believe this paragraph can be short, concise, and to the point. PP9 can be read as follows: stressing the urgent need to take effective measures to achieve nuclear disarmament, full stop. Because here we are mentioning the major points that we are following here. And on PP11, we think that it is very important preambular paragraph which elaborate our goal. So it should be modified in this line: determined to act with a view to achieving effective prohibition of nuclear weapons. Because we are, as I said, talking here about the goal of this convention. We are not, you know, the general and complete disarmament is not subject of the discussion here. That is something else which can be dealt somewhere, in other places. But under this convention, we are talking about prohibition of nuclear weapons. So we need to emphasize on this topic. On 11, we are suggesting 11 bis to be mentioned here, which is as follows. It has already been suggested by Cuba, and other delegations supported that. But the wording that we are suggesting in that line is as follows: convinced that the only absolute and effective guarantee against the use of nuclear weapons is their complete elimination under strict and effective international control. And our understanding is that, in addition to the prohibition of nuclear weapons, in order to, exclude completely the possibility of the use of nuclear weapons, we need to have, through their elimination, we need to have one paragraph here after 11 bis, which can be as follows. 11 ter, recognizing the need for seeking effective measures to exclude completely the possibility of the use of nuclear weapons through their total elimination in a verifiable, irreversible, and transparent manner, and declaring their intention to continue negotiations to this end. So in this paragraph, while we have already elaborated our major goal in this convention, we are referring to the ultimate goal and how the ultimate goal can be achieved. On 12, which is regarding the ICJ advisory opinion, we do agree with that to be mentioned here, but we do not see any need to reference to the, fact that this is ICJ advisory opinion, because we want to upgrade this advisory opinion as the opinion of the member states and opinion of international community and opinion of the members of this convention and this conference. And we need to have, I think, one PP12 bis. In PP12, we, introduce the link between the prohibition of nuclear weapons and the international obligations to start negotiations to conclude the nuclear disarmament convention. I think we need to go further and have one paragraph to make it more specific and show the linkage between this document and the commitment of the states parties under the NPT under Article 6. So PP2 bis can be read as follows: recalling the undertaking of the states parties to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons under its Article 6 to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to nuclear disarmament. I thank you, Madam President.
Le agradezco a la
I'd like to thank the delegation of Iran. I give the floor to the delegation of Austria.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now we are getting so many interesting and good proposals. So I will refrain from putting forward new versions, new tweakings, because I think this will complicate, and I hope that the delegations that have different versions of the same basic ideas will get together to unify them. So I would like to support my colleague from Mozambique to move the present PP7 up. I want to support the new PP presented by South Africa yesterday. I also want to support the many good proposals that Cuba yesterday offered. Today, Egypt introduced language which we find very good, addressing military doctrines, and also the PP7 bis of Egypt is attractive to us. I want to support Indonesia. they proposed in PP8 there will be, and I think our colleague from Palestine had equally a good proposal with constitute, and I want to commend him that he said but will would also work for him. So we should unify ourselves, and it's also important that at the end it will read achieving and maintaining a world without nuclear weapons as proposed by Indonesia. Further on, I want to support Brazil on PP9. Indeed, we prefer the total elimination of nuclear weapons. And we share the opinion that was just now also expressed by Iran, that means of delivery outside the scope of this convention, so we would rather not introduce elements that go beyond the prohibition of nuclear weapons. With regard to Iran's 11 bis, we fully share the idea, and I think that goes totally in line with what we yesterday introduced as a new paragraph 2 bis, which in the second part is contains the same idea, that the only way to guarantee that nuclear weapons will never be used again is through their total elimination. I hope I did not forget other valid points, because there were so many, and I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to Austria. I give the floor to the delegation of Mexico. They'll be followed by Fiji, Netherlands, Holy See Island, and then Peru. Thank you very much, Madam President. Following up the discussion and proposals made yesterday, we'd like to support the proposal of South Africa to include an additional paragraph on the threat of the use. Also want to support the proposal of Mozambique on PP7 to move it as make it the first PP. And we also want to support modifications proposed by Cuba, Indonesia in PP8, and finally want to support modifications presented by Brazil for PP9. Thank you. Thank you to Mexico.
Tiene la palabra la delegación.
Give the floor to the delegation of Fiji, to be followed by Netherlands, Holy See Island, Peru.
Thank you sincerely, Madam President. I join the other esteemed delegates in congratulating you for your excellent and sterling leadership. In particular, we thank you for the proposed draft instrument before us, as it awaits our further deliberation in its second day today. Fiji attaches great importance to the instrument, and we assure you of our fullest support. I also thank you for the arrangements of our discussion today. Please allow me to share some of our views to further strengthen the preamble. We concur with New Zealand and Liechtenstein on PP4 on IHL cluster. Line 1, however, we wish to extend to recognize human rights law as well, along with IHL and environmental law. I guess IHL law applies to armed conflict, while human rights law applies to all times in peace and in war. Secondly, Madam President, on the environmental implication, we note in terms of nuclear weapon detonation alone is explicit, but not the production of nuclear weapon. The environment legacy of uranium mining, production and manufacture of nuclear weapons, testing, and waste disposal are also significant. The preamble could recognize not just the suffering for use and testing, but also the production aspect. Furthermore, Madam President, given the importance of the sea and ocean for the life of coastal and island people and the severe marine impacts of nuclear testing in the Pacific, the preamble could reference both terrestrial and marine ecosystem and support the Marshall Islands for that. Lastly, Madam President, we support the proposals by the esteemed delegates as discussed yesterday, particularly PP1 for completely eliminate in place of make every effort, likewise total ban in place of never used again. The same applies to PP2, threat in place of implications and women maternal health. That is also an agreement. And we thank the esteemed delegates for raising that earlier. Likewise for PP4, in addition to in humanitarian law to include rule of distinction and rule of protection, likewise the rule of environment, which made reference to international humanitarian law. And finally, on PP5, we also agreed to the use of threat by the esteemed delegates. We have raised that yesterday, as well as a great breach, which was also good to strengthen that document further. So once again, Madam President, thank you sincerely for giving the floor to us, and I thank you.
Le agradezco.
Thank you very much to Fiji. I want to point out at the end of this group, or the discussion of this cluster, of the preamble, we can then give floor to delegations for any other theme that hasn't been referred to in the existing paragraphs. I give the floor now to the Netherlands.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We have listened carefully to all proposals presented thus far, and at this stage we would like to add to the discussion with a number of suggestions and observations. And first let me address paras 8 to 12. Paragraph 8 states that the prohibition of nuclear weapons would be an important contribution towards comprehensive nuclear disarmament. However, without indicating how this is actually to be achieved. The remainder of the text does not provide us with such elements either, and we hope that throughout the text improvements will be made to clarify this point and make the text more broadly acceptable to all UN member states. When it comes to paras 11 and 12, although these paragraphs are in conformity with the language found in the NPT, we propose the inclusion of an actual reference to the NPT. And you just indicated that at the end of the session there's space for additional points for other paragraphs, and indeed we have some elements for paragraphs 1 to 6 because we only finalized them this morning. So then with your permission, after we conclude consideration of para 14, I will come with some additional comments. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you to the Netherlands. I give the floor to the Holy See.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. Since it's the first time that the Holy See is taking the floor at this second session, on behalf of my delegation, I want first of all to congratulate you, as well as your colleagues, for your superb work ahead of this second negotiating session. We want to assure you at the same time of our full support in your in these historic efforts. Our delegation agrees with others who would support a simple treaty as a stage towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons with means for implementation, appropriate means of implementation. The Holy See also supports the proposal from South Africa regarding ethic imperatives for a world free of nuclear weapons as a global public good of the highest order. Finally, the Holy See is in agreement with delegations who wish to link the work of this conference to the UN Charter. As Pope Francis said, the international community is called on to promote the goal of peace and stability. To that end, we would like to propose an addition to PP7 describing the positive content and substance of peace. The paragraph would read as follows.
Determined to contribute to the realization of the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, in particular to strengthen universal peace as built on justice, the respect of fundamental human rights and integral human development. Bien sûr, nous soumettrons.
Of course, we'll submit our proposal in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, Madam President.
Muchas gracias a Santa Sede.
Thank you very much to the Holy See. Give the floor to Ireland, to be followed by Peru.
Thank you, Madam President. We have heard with interest the large number of proposals that have been made on this cluster, and we find it very encouraging that there has been so far such active and strong engagement on these issues, and we are still only at the preamble. All of the proposals are no doubt interesting, and we find all of them to be constructive. However, we do think it is important to keep in mind the need to avoid inflating the text of the preamble too much, so that we might risk diluting the political message that we want to convey. In line with this, my delegation would like to add our voice to those having supported the proposal made by Indonesia on PP8 to strengthen this paragraph. We think that was a very positive and constructive proposal, and we would also like to support the proposal made by Brazil on PP9 to simplify that paragraph. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Peru. Thank you, Madam President. Since it's the first time I'm taking the floor, let me to congratulate you and to wish you every success in the substantive work, and rest assured of my delegation's support. Peru is grateful for the draft text that you circulated. It's a good basis for the negotiating process, and we believe it contains the suggestions, points of view of participants in the first session last March. And allow me now to refer to PP8. My delegation supports the proposal of Cuba to include the term legally binding. That will further strengthen the paragraph. We also support the proposal of the distinguished delegation of Indonesia to change the verb in that paragraph to will instead of would. And we're flexible as to putting at the end of the paragraph a reference to prohibiting nuclear weapons, and this is needed for achieving a world free of such weapons. As to PP9, we support fully Cuba's suggestion to characterize the elimination of national arsenals, that this should, saying that this should be irreversible, verifiable, and transparent. On PP11, it's important to maintain the concept of general complete disarmament, since this has been reflected in other international disarmament instruments such as the Convention on the Prevention, the CWC, among others. We also support the proposal of Mozambique to move PP7 to the beginning of the preamble. We also welcome the Egyptian proposal, which is relevant, to have a paragraph on the concerns at lack of progress in the disarmament machinery and also on delegitimizing the concept of nuclear deterrence. Finally, we support the proposal of South Africa to include a new paragraph on the threat of the use of nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to the delegation of Peru. And to close the discussion on the current cluster, we have on the list, we have Chile and Ghana. Thank you very much, Madam President. We believe, so PP11, we think the concept of general and complete disarmament is fundamental. It needs to be present in the text because it puts into perspective the efforts that we're making. The concept of general complete disarmament is a part of the practice, the mechanisms to ensure the implementation of UN principles. That principle gets the very heart of the whole system of collective security that's enshrined in the Charter. Incorporating a comprehensive focus on disarmament helps us to overcome and to try to overcome a fragmented approach where we're only to overcome just partial, piecemeal measures, because otherwise we lose sight of the ultimate goal. Now, partial, piecemeal measures can be useful, but it's important not that we don't lose sight of the bigger picture, and that we believe that this concept highlights. So we think that general complete disarmament should continue to be present in the text because it reflects so well that bigger picture. Thank you. Thank you very much to Chile. I give the floor to Ghana, to be followed by South Africa.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, we would like to thank you for the leadership that you've shown so far in steering the affairs of this conference. We strongly agree with your approach on the way forward. Madam President, my delegation would like to endorse the proposal by the delegation of Egypt that there should be a 7Bs, reflecting our dissatisfaction with the lack of progress towards nuclear disarmament. Similarly, we endorse the valid proposal by Egypt to insert 7Bs to delegitimize nuclear reliance on security and military doctrines. My delegation also supports the change of the wording in paragraph 8, particularly the word bearing in mind to stressing, and then will constitute to reflect a more stronger language as proposed by our colleague from Indonesia. We are also comfortable with the idea by Mozambique to move PP7 up and also specify the principles and purposes of the UN Charter as contained in Article 1 and 2 of the UN Charter. Thank you for giving me the floor, Madam President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to Ghana. I give the floor to South Africa, to be followed by Algeria.
Thank you, Madam, for giving us the floor. My delegation would like to support the proposal made by Indonesia to replace would with will and to delete the reference to comprehensive nuclear disarmament and replace it with achieving and maintaining a world free of without nuclear weapons. In our view, this proposed language strengthens this paragraph. On PP9, we also support the amendments made by Brazil as they contribute in simplifying the language. Thank you. Bye.
Many thanks, South Africa. I give the floor to the delegation of Algeria.
President, for giving me the floor. First of all, I would like to join other delegations in thanking you for the approach you have chosen for us in order to facilitate our work, and we strongly support you for achieving our goal. In this regard, I would like to just add our voice to the other delegations in supporting the Egypt's new PP regarding the lack of progress. Likewise, we support Indonesia in changing the wording of would to will, and Cuba's proposal regarding the advisory opinion, as well as South Africa in adding a new para on threat of use. Finally, my delegation also has no problem to move the PP7, as Mozambique has proposed, to the top of the PPs, and I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks to the delegation of Algeria. There are no more delegations on the speakers list. There are no more delegations wishing to take the floor to refer to this sub-cluster. A great deal of comments have been made on this section. So I'd like to take this opportunity to give the floor to delegations that said yesterday that they were looking for some compromise language. If any progress has been made that they wish to share with us, the floor is open for those delegations. Comments, that is, regarding this subcluster, of course.
Tiene la palabra.
I give the floor to the delegation of Ecuador. Thank you, President. Regarding language on socio-economic development, yesterday my delegation, and I think also the delegation of Cuba, sent a proposal to you which was based largely on the language proposed by Cuba. And brief additions were made to that language, and that pertains to socio-economic development. And I think it was included in the preamble document that was circulated, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you.
Le agradezco a la.
Thank you to the delegation of Ecuador. For the moment, there doesn't appear to be any other delegations which wish to report back on compromise language pertaining to this point, and so we move to consideration now of paragraph 13 and then paragraph 14. And that will allow us to close our consideration of the first reading of the preambular section. Thank you. I have 3 delegations that have requested to take the floor. I don't know if they wish to talk about paragraph 13 or 14, or if they wish to make additional comments on the cluster of paragraphs on which our work is currently concluding. Brazil, Iran, Egypt, Argentina. Could you tell me if you're asking for the floor to talk about the new paragraph 13 or about other paragraphs in this subcluster? Thank you. As we said yesterday, paragraph 13 is the first of the various provisions which exist in the text as it stands and that need to be retained throughout the text of the instrument. These provisions reflect the various appeals made to ensure that this instrument complements, strengthens, and in no way weakens other international instruments which are currently in force. international instruments which are part of the machinery as it stands, with particular reference to the NPT, aspects which are currently enshrined within the mandate of this conference. This paragraph also responds to appeals made to see a specific reference being made to the CTBT and other treaties which establish nuclear weapon-free zones. So I'd now like to open the floor to any delegations who have comments to make on this point. We have quite a long speakers list now, and I give the floor to the delegation of Brazil.
Thank you very much, Madam President. With regards to this paragraph, we find it pertinent to have references to these three bodies of treaties that are relevant to our work. On the other hand, we find, upon reading it, that it establishes, in a way, an artificial hierarchy among the three that we would wish to project in a different way, because it states, firstly, the crucial importance of the NPT as cornerstone for international nuclear non-proliferation regime and an essential foundation for the pursuit of nuclear disarmament. It has been a cornerstone for the international nuclear non-proliferation regime, but I think it's perhaps pushing it a bit far to consider that it has been an essential foundation for the pursuit of nuclear disarmament, whereas as we have come 20 years, many years later actually, to the point where we have to actually work on this treaty to make the agenda move forward. Secondly, the vital importance of the CTBT as a core element of nuclear disarmament, etc. It's true, but it's still not in force. We're waiting for that. We consider it extremely important for it to come into force. And thirdly, the contribution only of the treaties establishing nuclear weapon-free zones. But these are treaties that have established real effective obligations for its members. So of the three, in terms of disarmament, strictly in terms of disarmament, I would say the third one, in fact, is the one that has managed to establish a real legal obligation for its members to maintain an area free of weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear weapons. So we are proposing separating this paragraph into three smaller ones for each of the different sets of treaties. And it would read, I will read quickly, but we will hand it over in writing. The first one would read, reaffirming that the full and effective implementation of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons has a vital role in promoting international peace and security. Then the second one would read, recognizing the continued vital importance of the entry into force of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty to the advancement of nuclear disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation objectives. And third, reaffirming the conviction that the establishment of the internationally recognized nuclear weapon-free zones on the basis of arrangements freely arrived at among the states of the region concerned enhances global and regional peace and security, strengthens the nuclear non-proliferation regime, and contributes towards realizing the objectives of nuclear disarmament. We believe that in this fashion we have a more effective and a more true to fact expression of the three sets of obligations. Thank you.
Many thanks, Brazil. We have on our list Egypt, Argentina, Sweden, Ecuador, Cuba, Iran, Philippines, and the list continues to grow. I give the floor to the delegation of Egypt.
Thank you, Madam President. My delegation would like to support in totality the suggestions made by the delegation of Brazil to separate this paragraph into three separate paragraphs. I think it makes more sense to make it in that structure. My delegation would like to propose amendments to PP13, and it goes along with the same lines of what Brazil had suggested, because in the way it is formulated right now, it would place equivalent status to nuclear nonproliferation and nuclear disarmament as cornerstones or pillars of the NPT, because the way it is drafted now almost reflects that nonproliferation has a more centralized status than nuclear disarmament. Therefore, we would suggest to rephrase the paragraph into the following, I quote, reaffirming the crucial importance of the NPT as the cornerstone of the international nuclear nonproliferation and nuclear disarmament regime, so putting them on the same status. But again, we're flexible with the suggestion made by the delegation of Brazil, where I think we're on the same page in this regard. We also suggest the deletion of CTBT as a core element of nuclear disarmament and limiting it as an element of the non-proliferation regime. CTBT couldn't be considered as a disarmament tool since modernization of nuclear stockpiles is ongoing through subcritical tests. So the reference to CTBT here, I think, should be limited to the non-proliferation regime, also putting into consideration that the CTBT has yet to enter into force. We would also like to make the last sentence in PP13, as I had earlier mentioned, as a separate paragraph on nuclear weapon-free zones in order to emphasize the importance and contribution of nuclear weapon-free zones to nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. So we are suggesting the phrasing that it would start stressing the contribution of treaties establishing nuclear weapon-free zones toward strengthening the nuclear non-proliferation regime and to realizing the objective of nuclear disarmament. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks, Egypt. Argentina has the floor, followed by Switzerland and Ecuador. Thank you, Madam President. The delegation of Argentina sent to you a proposal for language on paragraph 13. We gave that to you yesterday. For us, this paragraph is crucial because one of the goals of the Argentine delegation in this negotiation process is to preserve and strengthen the existing regime of NPT. The drafting proposal which has been made is relevant to, in our view. We would suggest breaking this paragraph down to highlight the relevance of all three instruments. First of all, the NPT. We would have no problem with the suggestion made by the delegation of Egypt. We support that suggestion. Then we would follow with CTBT and nuclear weapon-free zones. The delegation of Argentina also wishes to highlight the fact that, in our view, it is crucial to retain the reference in the preamble, this reference in the preambular section, but we believe that this goal has to be strengthened in the operative section of the draft treaty. This would ensure that we rightly preserve the existing regime, and when it's relevant to refer to the CTBT and the NPT, we'll do so, particularly when it comes to the verification regime. So we'll work in the operative section of the text in order to keep those mentions there. Thank you to Argentina. Switzerland, then Ecuador.
Thank you, Madam President. As we now are discussing PP13, I'm more than happy to take the floor. First of all, I would like to reiterate that we deem particularly important that we ensure a clear and constructive relationship between this treaty and other agreements, in particular NPT and CTBT. So we welcome very much this PP13. All the more we think that it is important to strengthen this paragraph. With regard to the CTBT, we would suggest that the preamble makes an explicit reference to the importance of the entry into force of the CTBT, and there we join Brazil. The preamble should also make a reference to the international monitoring system as set up by the CTBT. We think it must be clear from the preamble that the ban treaty, when it comes to the prohibition of testing, does not intend to undermine efforts with regard to the CTBT and the CTBT entry into force, or even create an alternative norm, but on the contrary reinforces the CTBT norm. With regard to the NPT, we are of the view that instead of reaffirming the crucial importance, etc., as in the first sentence of PP13, we should rather reaffirm that the NPT is the cornerstone of international disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation regime. As simple as that. It is the cornerstone, all the more that this is language taken from the Taking Forward resolution adopted last autumn and launching these negotiations. So we think that should be a language wording agreeable to everyone. My third point is the link between PP13 and Article 19. I think we need to make sure that the two are coherent. So I'll get back to Article 19 once we get there. And last but not least, the proposal made by Brazil of separating this paragraph into three is fine with us. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks, Switzerland. I now give the floor to Ecuador, followed by Cuba, Iran, and the Philippines. Many thanks, President. Ecuador supports the proposal made by Brazil, a proposal which has also been supported by other delegations. That is to separate this paragraph into three. I think that no one wants to weaken any other instrument, and we need to take care to reflect that. Rather, we want to properly reflect what the instruments are, what they've achieved, and what they can achieve. And I think the comments made by Brazil and Egypt go in that direction. That is, comments regarding NPT and the CTBT. I think those proposals are very valid and go in that direction. As regards nuclear weapon-free zones, and in full agreement with comments regarding the impact they've had in looking for a world free of nuclear weapons, in light of all that, we wish to propose language to you. We'll send that to you, of course, but we would propose language on these zones and have a new preamble paragraph, and it would say, acknowledging the important positive impact that nuclear weapon-free zones created by the treaties of Tlatelolco, Rarotonga, Bangkok, Semipalatinsk, and all of these have been referred to by the colleagues of Central Asia, as well as the treaties of Pelindaba and the Declaration of Mongolia as a nuclear weapons-free zone. These had a positive impact in the search for a world free of nuclear weapons. That is our proposal for a new preamble paragraph. Of course, we're ready to work on that language and find common language, but that's all we wish to say for the time being. Thank you. Many thanks, Ecuador. I now give the floor to the delegation of Cuba. Many thanks, President. First of all, I wish to share with you my views and support the initial substantive comments made by Brazil. These are in full harmony with Cuban's position, but I need to frankly say that, at least for the moment, we would prefer to see all these references reflected in one single paragraph instead of dividing up this paragraph into three or splitting it. We will consider that proposal to split this paragraph, but for the moment we would prefer to work on the basis of the idea that this paragraph remains as one and is balanced and is drafted in such a way that avoids fragmentation. On this paragraph, we'd also wish to introduce an explicit reference to Article 6 of the NPT, given that, in our view, this reference would be particularly relevant against the backdrop of this convention or treaty. And in that context, we also wish to... Well, I'm now going to read a proposal in English. This would be a proposal for an alternative paragraph to the current paragraph 13. I'll read it as follows in English.
Reaffirming the obligation set forth in Article 6 of the Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and the importance of that treaty as the cornerstone of the international nuclear non-proliferation regime. the importance of the CTBT as a relevant element of the non-proliferation regime, and also the important contribution of the treaties establishing nuclear weapons free zone towards strengthening the nuclear non-proliferation regime and to realizing the objective of nuclear disarmament. Esa sería.
This, Madam President, would be our proposal for an alternative paragraph which we submit to the consideration of other delegations. Thank you. Many thanks indeed, Cuba. I now give the floor to Iran, followed by the Philippines, Nigeria, and Austria.
Thank you, Madam President. On PP 13, I think this argument that we can split this paragraph to 2-3 paragraphs is understandable. I think we should avoid, to the extent possible, any qualifier for these conventions because there is no convergence of views, consensus on this. But if they are going to mention anything about that, I think the points made by Cuba is a relevant one. But on CTBT, we do believe that since as long as CTBT has not been entered into force, I do not see any merit to mention it here, as stated by Egypt also. On the last part of this paragraph, which talks about the establishment of role of the establishment of nuclear-free zone and the importance of these zones, we like to have a reference to the importance of establishment of nuclear zone in the Middle East. Because, you know, Madam Ambassador, we have a resolution, consensus resolution of the General Assembly from 1980 up to now. And this desire of international community must be reflected here as an important issue that realization of this goal definitely will help the goal that we are pursuing here to be realized. So in this line, I would suggest to add at the end of this paragraph, apart from any changes that might happen due to the suggestions made by distinguished delegates, at the end we can add, and in this regard, underlining the need for and strongly supporting the establishment of such zones in other parts of the world where they do not exist, in particular in the Middle East. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Many thanks to the delegation of Iran. Philippines, you have the floor, followed by Nigeria and Austria.
Thank you, Madam President. My delegation appreciates the importance of this paragraph, PP 13, which mentions the importance of and the pillars of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation instruments existing today, which are the NPT, the CTBT, and the various nuclear weapons-free zones around the world. As my delegation mentioned at the first session last March, the Philippines, along with the other ASEAN member states, in general, are approaching this conference from the perspective and experience of the Bangkok Treaty, which established the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapons-Free Zone. We thank the proposals put forward earlier by the speakers ahead of me, including those of Brazil and Ecuador, who in particular proposed a specific paragraph for mentioning the nuclear weapons-free zone, and we look forward to studying them further. Madam President, the Philippines would like to see a reference in the preamble to the state's inalienable right to the peaceful uses of energy, of nuclear energy, in particular for their economic development and social progress. My delegation believes that this is a fundamental principle enshrined not just in the Bangkok Treaty, but in the NPT itself. And for this purpose, we believe that it should be reiterated in this treaty. Towards this end, we propose to reflect this in PP13 within the context of the NPT and its 3 pillars, and we wish to make the following suggestions to the language of PP13. First, we wish to add, after the phrase pursuit of, the following phrase, its 3 pillars, namely. And second, after nuclear disarmament, we wish to add nuclear non-proliferation and the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. So the revised paragraph will now read, reaffirming the crucial importance of the treaty and on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons as the cornerstone of the international nuclear non-proliferation regime and an essential foundation for the pursuit of its 3 pillars, namely nuclear disarmament, nuclear non-proliferation, and the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, the vital importance of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, etc. My delegation will be happy to submit this in writing to the Secretariat accordingly. Thank you, Madam President.
Many thanks, Philippines. Nigeria, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I would like to first point out the issue raised by the distinguished ambassador of Brazil regarding para 13. For us, we love the MPT, for instance, but we should not be caught making a scale of preference for these instruments. And it is in that light we believe that the proposal by Brazil, for us, we would like to see it, but on the face value, it sounds okay, it sounds wonderful for us, and we can work on that. Perhaps we could also see the intervention by the distinguished delegate of Iran. Yes, in as much as we believe that CTBT has not entered into force, and we have some delegates have challenges with that, but we believe that all instruments, as long as they tend to point to one direction, and the direction is for us to live in a nuclear-free world, should be included in this para. And it's in that light that I would want to agree with him regarding the part about nuclear weapon-free zone of the inclusion, if possible, that including in the Middle East. We would like to have that. But basically, we would love to see the proposal made by Brazil and look at it because for us it sounds okay. I thank you.
Many thanks, Nigeria. I give the floor to the delegation of Austria, followed by Guatemala and Mozambique.
Thank you so much, Madam President. I would like to support the proposal tabled by Brazil, and as we have seen in the course of the discussion, and there were quite a number of very good ideas and interventions, it seems to strike the balance, because we have heard Cuba proposing to mention in particular Article 6, which I think is very logical in this context, and at the same time the Philippines wanting also to have language on all 3 pillars of the NPT. And when we take a look at the Brazilian proposal, it speaks of reaffirming the full and effective implementation of the treaty of the NPT. So I think there is a certain balance here that Brazil has found in its language. And also with regard to how to refer to the CTBT, I think Brazil does refer to the entry into force of the CTBT, and sees there an advancement, the entry into force of nuclear disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation objectives. So how I read it, it does not take side in the discussion whether the CTBT is only non-proliferation or also adds something with regard to nuclear disarmament, because it is the entry into force that is of vital importance to the advancement of, and then both comes. So I think the Brazilian proposal is very good and might help us finding common ground. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Austria.
Thank you very much, Austria. Guatemala, to be followed by Mozambique, New Zealand, and Ireland. Thank you, Madam President. With regards to PP13, like others, thinks it's timely to stress the importance of nuclear weapons-free zones and the treaties establishing them. Therefore, we're proposals to separate the paragraph into two paragraphs. One paragraph on nuclear weapons-free zones and their treaties establishing them and their relevance to the prohibition process would read as follows.
The vital contribution of the treaties establishing nuclear weapon-free zones toward strengthening the nuclear non-proliferation regime and to realizing the objective of nuclear disarmament. También
Also, we think that in the same paragraph, it's important to, in addition to recognizing the importance of the NPT, that we also make a reference to the intrinsic linkage between the new convention and the NPT, recognizing that the convention will complement and reinforce the NPT. With reference to Article 6, promoting its full implementation, as has already been mentioned by the delegation of Cuba. But Guatemala is flexible. We can accept the proposal also of Brazil of splitting it up into 3. We also look favorably upon the Ecuador proposal, and we don't see any contradiction in this treaty and the CTBT prohibiting tests. Now, however, we do know that 20 years after its ratification, the CTBT still hasn't entered force. Thank you, Guatemala. I give the floor to Mozambique.
Madam President, thank you very much for giving me the floor. In the course of our deliberations, Cuba has been making excellent contributions, and we want to salute Cuba for its constructive approach to all this process. I have listened very carefully to the proposal by Brazil, and I think that my delegation will support that proposal. First of all, the splitting of the paragraph into 3 different preamble paragraphs facilitates our understanding on top of making the text very, very clear. But secondly, it's important to make the text very simple because it will have a very important bearing on the interpretation of the treaty. If we bring everything together into just one paragraph, the lawyers will have trouble in interpreting such a treaty. So this is the advantage, the major advantage that I can find in splitting, and the language is very clear, neutral, and objective. So I will support the proposal by Brazil, and I think that additional contributions could be made in drafting the text, but I would submit that we should, our point of departure should be the text presented by Brazil. Thank you very much Madam President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I give the floor to New Zealand, to be followed by Ireland, Mexico, Singapore.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Like the Guatemalan delegation, we can be flexible as regards the treatment of PP13. We're not opposed to the splitting into 3. But if, reflecting the views of some here, such as Cuba, that it should remain 1 paragraph, and disagreeing unusually with my dear friend Pedro from Mozambique, I think lawyers can still probably understand the language I would like to put forward as an amendment to the current PP3 if we retain the 3 elements within a single paragraph. My amendment, Madam President, would be to suggest the language could say, cognizant of the crucial importance of the NPT as the cornerstone of international nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, and of the significant contributions to nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament which have been made by the CTBT and its verification regime, as well as by the treaties which have established nuclear weapon-free zones. We think that this is a simplified version of what is currently set out in PP13. I would hope that lawyers can understand it. And just to make it very clear, Madam President, we are not able to support Egypt's suggestion that there should be a removal of the reference to CTBT. We think that the international monitoring system is making a very significant contribution, and we would not wish to see the deletion of any reference to CTBT, and we would wish to see a reference to the CTBT's verification regime. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. To New Zealand, I give the floor to Ireland.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, we welcome the reference in the preamble of all 3 instruments in current paragraph 13, the NPT, the CTBT, and the Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone treaties. Ireland fully subscribes to the importance of these instruments. We agree with all those delegations that have pointed out that these instruments could perhaps best be addressed in 3 separate paragraphs, and therefore we support the Brazilian proposal to split PP13 into 3 paragraphs. We also support the language amendments suggested by Brazil. There are quite a few positive elements there that we like. The clarity and simplicity of the new language is one such element, and we much prefer it to the original formulation, which we find a bit more complex. The fact that it omits a reference to the 3 pillars of the NPT is another positive element in our view. Of course, Ireland would not have a problem with referring to the pillars of the NPT, but we believe that the discussion around the hierarchy between these pillars is one that risks causing some controversy and perhaps should best be avoided. So the Brazilian language has the advantage of avoiding that discussion. We also very much like the focus on the full and effective implementation of the NPT as opposed to simply its status as the cornerstone of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Ireland has no problem with the proposal made by Switzerland to make reference to the term cornerstone. We would be able to support that, but we would also like to see a reference to the full and effective implementation. Same for the CTBT. We believe a reference to this instrument is very important in the preamble. We very much like the Brazilian language focusing on the need for the entry into force of the CTBT. We don't think that reaffirming the status of these instruments just for the sake of granting them a supernatural status in itself should be our objective here. It is about the full and effective implementation and the entry into force respectively, rather than just their status. Therefore, we would like to support the language suggested by Brazil, And of course, we are then flexible to discuss whether this new language should be kept into 3 separate paragraphs, or if that is very problematic for some delegations, we are flexible in discussing such language in 1 paragraph as well. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mexico. Thank you, Madam Chair. We'd like to support Brazil's proposals to separate the PP13 into 3, to include a paragraph that would reaffirm the importance of full effective implementation of the NPT to promote peace and security. Also, we support the inclusion of a PP, separate PP, on the vital importance of the entry into force of the CTBT, and finally, the inclusion of a PP that would reaffirm the contribution of nuclear weapons-free zones towards realizing the objective of nuclear disarmament. Thank you. Thank you, Mexico. Give the floor to Singapore, to be followed by South Africa, Sweden, Kazakhstan, and Zimbabwe.
Thank you very much, Madam President. While we are ultimately flexible, we are broadly supportive of the comments and proposals that have been made in terms of drawing the distinction between the NPT, CTBT, and nuclear weapon-free zones in as separate paragraphs, and the proposals that have been made by Brazil. We support the views and consequently proposals which reflect that the NPT is the cornerstone of the international non-proliferation regime, as well as the full and effective implementation of the NPT, the invaluable contributions of treaties establishing nuclear weapon-free zones, and the point made by Brazil that nuclear weapon-free zones have made a real impact on the ground. On this note, we also support the specific comment and share the view by Philippines that as a state party to the Bangkok Treaty, we are approaching the conference guided primarily by the Bangkok Treaty. The reference on the importance, we also support the reference on the importance of the entry into the force of the CTBT. As outlined yesterday, Singapore would also like to propose an additional paragraph to strengthen language in the preamble in relation to the congruence between the new convention with the existing disarmament architecture. The intent is to emphasize the complementarity and compatibility to the other disarmament treaties, including the NPT, CTBT, and other nuclear weapon-free zone treaties. We had initially conceived a standalone paragraph, but remain open to the possibility of strengthening language in existing paragraphs. The proposal would be stressing the need to prohibit nuclear weapons, leading to their total elimination, in conformity with the rights and obligations under existing treaties, including the NPT, CTBT, and treaties establishing nuclear weapon-free zones. Madam President, we recognize that there are quite a few moving parts, including to other segments of the preamble, which might render our proposal duplicative. We also note that Article 19 contains language that is broadly similar, and comments that have been made that the paragraph or paragraphs in the preamble should be coherent with Article 19. We look forward to subsequent discussion on Article 19, including on rights or purported rights conferred by the NPT. We have also heard calls for us to bear in mind that we should avoid an overly lengthy preamble that may run the risk of diluting the political message. We share this view and will be happy to work constructively with other delegations towards a concise preamble and to ensure harmonization of proposals put forward when the revised version of the preamble is out. I thank you, Madam President.
Muchas gracias, Singapore.
Thank you, Singapore. Give the floor to South Africa.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll be very brief. My delegation supports the proposed amendments made by Brazil on para PP13. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Sweden to be followed by Kazakhstan.
Well, as regards whether we should have 1 paragraph or 3 paragraphs, we are rather flexible, but we were quite attracted to the New Zealand proposal, which we thought solved this in quite an elegant manner. But on the part of the preamble paragraph that speaks about the NPT, we would like to have the language proposed by Switzerland, and we think the word cornerstone is extremely important in this context, and we cannot support any proposals that would take out that particular word. Thank you, Madam.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Ambassador, I give the floor to Kazakhstan.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam President. We want to express our support for the proposal of Brazil on dividing the paragraph 13 into 3 parts, so to make it more effective and give special attention and importance to nuclear-free zones and 2 crucial basic documents. On nuclear-free zones, it's important to acknowledge the significant contribution made towards realizing the objectives of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation, pending the total elimination of nuclear weapons, through the establishment of nuclear weapon-free zone, although they are not an end in themselves. On CTBT, it's important to recognize the progress achieved in the establishment of the verification regime of the CTBT and its demonstrated ability to independently and reliably ensure compliance with the treaty. On NPT, it's important also to emphasize the crucial role of NPT in achieving the achieving nuclear disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation, and recalling in particular the unequivocal undertaking by the nuclear weapon states to accomplish the total elimination of their nuclear arsenals, leading to nuclear disarmament. We will send our proposals also in written form to the Secretariat. Thank you, Madam President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to Kazakhstan. Zimbabwe, to be followed by Liechtenstein, Sierra Leone, and Thailand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since this is our first time to take the floor, please allow me to express our gratitude for the manner in which you are steering our discussions so far. We wish you success, and we are going to support you throughout. Madam Chair, on PP 13, we just want to underline that we do recognize the importance of the issues raised in that PP, and we fully support the inclusion of those issues. We also want to mention our support for the proposal by Cuba to make a particular reference to Article 6 of the NPT. We do believe, Madam Chair, that it is the shortcomings of the implementation of the NPT in particular, particularly Article 6, that has brought us, to this day. We strongly believe that if the NPT, particularly Article 6, was working effectively, we wouldn't be here today. So we fully support the inclusion of that mention of Article 6. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to Zimbabwe. I give the floor to Liechtenstein.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Very briefly, for us, this paragraph also contains very important references, of course, to the existing treaties and frameworks, and it's very important that we get those right and strengthen the existing frameworks rather than undermine them. And we had our own proposal or attempt to rebalance the paragraph, but I will refrain from presenting it because in the meantime we've heard many useful proposals that aim at exactly that. And having listened to the discussion, I believe the approach of the Brazilian proposals to split up the different elements in this paragraph is very promising, and we would support it. We could also support many of the elements that I've heard on substance in these proposals, in particular the reference to the implementation of the NPT and also a reference to the entry into force of the CTBT. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. To Liechtenstein, I give the floor to Sierra Leone, to be followed by South Africa, Thailand, Venezuela.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Since this is the first time Sierra Leone is taking the floor, my delegation would like to thank you for your candid efforts in guiding these deliberations in trying to achieve the impact of this convention. Sierra Leone aligns itself with the interventions and proposals of Brazil and other states. Separating PP13 and upholding the elements of the instruments pointing towards nuclear-free world, and noting by the distinguished delegates, especially from Nigeria. We want to assure you that we will support you in your work, and we support Brazil. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Zimbabwe. Now we're getting close to the end of speakers on paragraph 13. I'd like to ask delegations who haven't yet done so, if they consider to not take the floor if they feel that in this final segment, if they believe that their points are already reflected. I give the floor at this point to South Africa.
Madam President, thanks for giving us the floor again. Madam President, I want to emphasize one point. Let me confess first, I'm not a legal person. I'm a bush lawyer. And I think there are many bush lawyers here and outside this conference. I have thought, I'm under the impression that we are here, few of us in this hall, on behalf of billions of people outside this hall. That is my understanding of our delegation. So, Chair, why we supported Brazilian proposal is because we always think of ordinary people outside the hall. Will they understand us? Will they understand the treaty? The Brazilian proposal has a possibility to achieve that. If you are having hibakushas at the back of the hall, and you ask hibakushas and others outside, if the current PP13 is understandable, they will tell you, no, we don't understand it. It's too complex. And I think that is what should inform our delegations. Are we taking people along with us, or is it only our treaty? Or are we negotiating a treaty on behalf of people outside because of potential consequences of a nuclear destruction? That I think, Chair, should be something that guide us. Guide us. Simple, direct, on behalf of people who are not inside the hall. There's a point I wanted to make, Chair. That's the point I really wanted to stress, that few of us here should not negotiate treaty for ourselves. It's for ordinary people, men, women outside there, they will have to buy into this treaty. Thank you, Mr. President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to South Africa. I give the floor to Thailand.
Thank you, Madam President. We just would like to support Brazil's proposal to divide paragraph 13 into 3 parts. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Venezuela. Thank you very much, Madam President. Venezuela also supports the proposal from Brazil on splitting the paragraph, PP13, into 3. We think the merit of this proposal is the fact that it gives balance and equilibrium to all the instruments mentioned here on the state of affairs when it comes to the implementation of those instruments. Venezuela, as I say, just wants to support that proposal. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a la delegación.
Thank you very much to Venezuela. And now on my list, I've got State of Palestine. And after that, we don't have any other request for the floor on this paragraph. Palestine.
Yes, we agree on the need to have, very clear principles, and I totally agree with what was said by the ambassador of South Africa. And this is why we also supported earlier the language proposed by Indonesia on a world free of nuclear weapons. We believe these kind of principles should be enunciated in the clearest terms. And we really want to commend you on having the reference to Hibakusha in the text and to remind us of the purpose for which we are here. And Palestine supported the presence and involvement of civil society for the very same purpose. And there are countries here who have suffered from nuclear weapons or nuclear testing, or who fear from nuclear weapons presence, and for them this subject is extremely sensitive, and that includes the state of Palestine. So we wanted to commend you for that and be in favor of whatever makes the text simpler and stronger.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. We've therefore concluded our consideration of Article 13, paragraph 13. Now, we now move on to a discussion of Article 14. This paragraph reflects the calls to recognize the role of civil society. The language is drawn from virtually identical wording that you have in the Anti-Personnel Mine Convention and the Cluster Munitions Conventions. And also in those conventions, the language reflects calls to recognize the long-standing efforts undertaken by the United Nations that can be seen going as far back as the very first General Assembly resolution. And also, there was also a very strong call to reflect the contributions of the ICRC and NGOs and Hibakusha. Now, this seeks to reflect the total sum, the full sum of all efforts needed to bring about a world free of nuclear weapons that have built up ever since the advent of nuclear weapons. So those efforts were based on the strength of public conscience. The paragraph also would constitute a first opportunity for a multilateral treaty on nuclear disarmament, open to universal membership, to make a explicit reference to the role of civil society. Therefore, I'd like to open the floor for comments on PP14. We have 3 delegations: Cuba, Nigeria, and Iran. Cuba has the floor.
Many thanks, Madam President. Thank you for your introduction of this paragraph. The delegation of Cuba has no difficulty whatsoever with the paragraph, substantive difficulty anyway, because we believe that as it currently stands, but it is incomplete. There are a number of holes in it as it currently stands, particularly when it comes to the acknowledgement of a number of institutions and organizations and the efforts they have made to pursue and achieve nuclear disarmament, where Latin America and the Caribbean is concerned. As you are aware, we have organizations that have played a pioneering role in promoting nuclear disarmament. This is the case for CELAC, where CELAC is concerned, and the Organization for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, OPANAL. These organizations have contributed to disarmament. I'm sure other organizations in other regions have made similar contributions. Of course, it's difficult to incorporate an exhaustive list of institutions and organizations that have pursued nuclear disarmament in this paragraph, so I would propose more general wording which attempts to broaden the acknowledgement of the work of these organizations so that we don't unfairly overlook specific institutions. In specific terms, our amendment proposal would be one which saw the third line of the paragraph include, after the word undertaking, it would include the phrase, among others, and then after United Nations, we would add the phrase, other international and regional organizations. If you'll allow me, Madam President, I will read the paragraph in English as it would stand with our suggestions.
Stressing the role of public conscience in the furthering of the principle of humanity as evidenced by the call for the total elimination of nuclear weapons and recognizing the efforts to that end undertaken, among others, by the United Nations, other international and regional organizations, the International Committee of the Red Cross, numerous non-governmental organizations, and the Iwakusha. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Muchas gracias. I thank the delegation of Cuba. I give the floor to the delegation of Nigeria, followed by Iran, Ireland, Egypt, Holy See, Netherlands, ICRC, and Fiji. Thank you.
Gracias, Señora Presidenta. Madam President, thank you so much. And what our proposal is, there are no diametrically opposed views between what we're about to propose and what the distinguished ambassador from Cuba has proposed, other than we want it to read very well. Of course, this is a para that reflects majorly the efforts over the years by various groups, and including, as you have stated here, non-governmental organizations. So, in a way, the proposal we're about to make fits into virtually all that have been said this morning, to further the fact that we need to find a way to encourage the law we have in nuclear disarmament, as well as legitimizing nuclear weapons, particularly the concept of deterrence. So we would love to take away some portions here, and then we give the language. For instance, if we start from the beginning, stressing the role of public conscience and in furthering of the principles of humanity, we don't think there is any general principle that is principle of humanity, but we understand the intention. The intention is the principle that binds humanity together. So we will try and find a language now, and then we'll read it. And secondly, we have it here, say, numerous non-governmental organizations. But by saying numerous, that presupposes that you don't have. Let us just encourage NGOs, so we know that NGOs have participated a lot in ensuring that we are where we are today regarding our efforts to put this thing together. So we will read, and what we're about to read is without prejudice to the proposals by the distinguished ambassador of Cuba. So I take it stressing the role of public conscience and the need to ensure human survival. So we're going to now say, rather than say the furthering of the principles of humanity, so to ensure human survival as evidenced by the call for the total elimination of nuclear weapons and recognizing the efforts to that end undertaken now with Cuba's proposal, among others, then we can go on. So I can go over it again with your permission, Madam President. Stressing the role of public conscience and the need to ensure human survival as evidenced by the call for the total elimination of nuclear weapons and recognizing the efforts to that end undertaking, among others, then it can continue. I thank you, Madam President.
Many thanks. Nigeria. Iran, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. On the list of those who have undertaken call for the total elimination, as it has already been said by Cuba, it is not exhaustive. And I think we can have, we are suggesting to add some, players to this part, which are after Red Cross. We can add religious leaders, parliamentarians, academia, and I suggest to delete numerous, because when we are talking about numerous non-government organizations, I don't know how many organizations are involved, and to make it more inclusive, we can have after undertaken in line 5, either the suggestion made by Rodolfo to have among others, or have inter alia, by the United Nations, blah, 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 up to the end. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks. Iran? I give the floor to Ireland, followed by Egypt, Holy See, Netherlands, ICRC. I just want to kindly, respectfully ask you, well, if a number of delegations believe that their concerns have already been reflected and voiced by delegations that have already taken the floor, please, I would kindly ask you not to take the floor to repeat things that have already been said, or please, in any case, be more concise if you can, given time constraints. That will allow us to be more productive. Ireland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. We'll be as concise as we can be. We certainly support a strong PP14. It should be clear, it should be concise, it should be precise. And taking into account particularly the concept of public conscience, and also building on the very strong intervention from South Africa just now on the need to bring the public with us. This is a treaty for everybody, not just for people in this room. We would like to build an extra paragraph at the end of PP14 on the same lines about the need to develop disarmament education and awareness raising, because something needs to feed the public conscience. The paragraph we have is quite short, quite simple, and would read as follows. Recognizing the importance of disarmament education in all its aspects, and of awareness raising on the risks and consequences of nuclear weapons for current and future generations, and committed to the dissemination of the principles and norms of this convention. We'll supply the text by email. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks. Egypt, you have the floor.
شكرا سيادة الرئيس.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would like to express our support to the proposal of Cuba. We believe it's a sound proposal since other international and regional organizations have also contributed, and not to mention them in this paragraph would not be appropriate. We therefore support the proposal made by Cuba. We'd also like to make a few proposals, drafting proposals, as follows.
Not in the furthering, in advancing the principles of humanity as reflected by the global call for the total elimination. شكرا سيادة الرئيس.
Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks, Egypt. Holy See, followed by Netherlands. Thank you, Madam President. Our delegation wishes to propose an addition to PP 14 on education for peace. We propose that following the first word stressing, we propose that we add the following expression.
Of education in fostering a culture of peace, and paragraph continues as drafted. Dans ce même
In that same PP 14, Holy See supports the proposal made by the Islamic Republic of Iran, that is to include the role of religious leaders among others. Thank you. Moreover, we would propose the addition of a new paragraph at the end of the preambular section as a general conclusion. It could read as follows.
To achieve the security of all states, nuclear and non-nuclear, and thus to contribute to international peace. End of the paragraph.
This paragraph enshrines and embodies the conference's commitment to strengthening the collective security as a vital prerequisite to lasting peace. A number of states do believe that nuclear weapons are necessary for their security, but these same weapons could harm this same security and indeed will not afford us long-term security, and this needs to be reflected. Thank you, Madam President.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks, Holy See. I give the floor to the delegation of Netherlands, followed by ICRC and Fiji.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The organizations which are mentioned in this paragraph play an indispensable role in the call for the total elimination of nuclear weapons, and this deserves the widest recognition. At the same time, in our view, the role and responsibilities of states should be emphasized where possible, as the only efforts which can lead to actual disarmament are to be undertaken by states. We therefore suggest to include the word states between undertaken by and the United Nations, and we'll also send an email on this one. Thank you.
Many thanks. Netherlands. ICRC, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. And we're indeed grateful for the specific reference to the International Committee of the Red Cross, which is concluded in this paragraph. However, given the active role of a large number of national Red Cross societies and their international federation on this issue, we would request states to consider replacing the International Committee of the Red Cross with the phrase, the International Red Cross and Red Crescent Movement. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks. Fiji, followed by Brazil, Uganda, and Thailand.
Thank you, Madam President. We would just like to register our support to Ireland and Holy See with regards to the inclusion of education in PP 14. We recognize the importance of education for disarmament as pursuant to UN study on disarmament and non-proliferation education, and its 34 recommendations unanimously adopted by the General Assembly in 2002. So therefore, our support to those two earlier proposals. Thank you, Madam President.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks, Brazil.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I think first of all, we would like to support the paragraph proposed by Ireland, the new one, on the importance of disarmament education, which we understand is clearly a missing element in this preamble and a very useful addition. There are several adjustments and proposals, amendments that we could support as well. And I think the ones that Cuba has made in particular, referring to other and regional organizations, is an important addition, eliminating unnecessary words such as numerous, etc. But I would like to make a comment. This is the proposal for an additional paragraph to the preamble. I know that at the end you would open, I think, the floor for additional paragraphs, but this particular one is in some way related with the concern expressed under this PP on the principles of humanity. Because what we have seen is that there are several paragraphs on international humanitarian law, and then we end on this note, which is an important one, on the principles of humanity. But in fact, we haven't said nothing regarding international human rights law. So we think this is a missing dimension to the preamble that we would wish to see fixed. And we have thought of drawing from language to this effect from the general comment of the Human Rights Committee, General Comment 14, under the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. This is from November 1984, I think. And it would read as follows. The placement, of course, we're flexible on the placement of the paragraph. It would read, convinced that nuclear weapons are among the greatest threats to human rights, particularly the right to life, which confront humankind today. So that's our proposal, to have the insertion of a human rights component in the preamble. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks, Brazil. Uganda, followed by Thailand.
Thank you, Madam President. Since this is the first time Uganda is taking the floor, we want to congratulate you and wish you all the best and assure you of our support until the end. I want to propose that in the spirit of what the Ambassador of South Africa said, instead of using public conscience, if we could use public awareness, because it's a simple language which most people can understand better than the one which has been put in the text. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks. Thailand, followed by Venezuela.
Thank you, Madam President. We would like to build on proposals by Cuba, Nigeria, and Iran. And in PP 14, would like to insert the word civil society after the Red Cross. So it would read the fourth line, Committee of the Red Cross, and civil society, including numerous non-governmental organizations and the Hibakusha. This could be compatible with the Iranian listing also of NGOs. But anyway, we are flexible on the exact language. The main idea is to mention the civil society. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks, Ambassador of Thailand. I now give the floor to Venezuela, followed by Mozambique. Thank you, Madam President. My delegation wishes to endorse the proposal made by the distinguished delegate of Cuba. It is, in our view, very important to refer to the contribution made by other international, regional organizations. Thus, the proposal made by the delegation of Ireland is also important and valid. That is the inclusion of the reference to education in this paragraph. So we should make sure that notion of education is incorporated into this paragraph. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Venezuela.
Thank you to Venezuela, Mozambique, Austria, Mexico, Indonesia, and Iran. Mozambique.
Se nos ha hecho una confusión.
I think there's been some confusion. Something's a bit confused on the screen. Things aren't quite clear. I had the following speakers list: Mozambique, Austria, Mexico, Indonesia, Iran. Mozambique. Ambassador, you have the floor.
I have no technical. Okay. Thank you, Madam President. I'm no longer going to invoke the role of lawyers in this paragraph. So initially, when I asked for the floor, was to support the paragraph as such with the amendments by Cuba and Nigeria. But ever since many other good proposals have been made, including by Ireland, Netherlands, ICRC, and lately by Brazil, the human rights dimension. This is a very important contribution, particularly the right to life, and we would support that. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. The delegation of Mexico has the floor. Excuse me, please accept my apologies. The screen's doing a few strange things. But the list I have is Austria, Mexico, Indonesia, and Iran. That was the order I had before anyway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, on paragraph 14, I can be very quick just to support the proposals made by the ICRC, to also support at the end of the paragraph additionally the inclusion of victims of nuclear testing to add after the Hibakusha. Also to say that we are open for some of the clarifications that were proposed by Iran and Cuba regarding other international organizations, academia, religious leaders and others. We think that will be positive additions. We would also like to support the new paragraph proposed by Ireland on disarmament education, which we think is essential to build awareness and understanding in present and future generations. And we also look very favorably at the proposal by the Holy See to clarify that the prohibition will indeed increase the safety for all. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Austria. Mexico, you have the floor. Thank you, Madam President. Just briefly, we wish to support the additions proposed by Cuba and Iran to Preamble paragraph 14 because these additions would broaden the acknowledgement of the efforts made to achieve the elimination of nuclear weapons by organizations. We also support the amendments proposed by the ICRC. Moreover, we support the proposal made by Ireland to include an additional paragraph which would acknowledge the importance of disarmament education, because this is in line with the efforts made by my country in this area, particularly within the framework of the resolution we presented to the first committee on this issue, and a resolution indeed that was adopted by consensus. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks, Mexico, Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to make a very brief intervention. We are very supportive of the new paragraph proposed by the esteemed delegation of Ireland on the need to have a strong education awareness on the threats of nuclear weapons. And having said that, we would like to make additional language on that, which refers to the commemoration of the total elimination of nuclear weapon, which we celebrate every year on the 26th of September. And this has been going on since 2014. And to my recollection, this event is very pertinent to all of us, and this has been participated by many UN member states, including the High Representatives and also the PGA. So I think it is very appropriate for us to also use this article, this paragraph, to raise awareness on the commemoration of the total elimination of nuclear weapons, which falls on the date of 26th of September. So I would like to flag this. I leave it to you on how you would want to fit in this new language, but I would strongly encourage us to support this. Thank you.
Many thanks, Indonesia. To close, we have the delegation of Iran.
Very briefly, Madam President, supporting the suggestion made by Ireland on the inclusion of paragraph regarding disarmament education and awareness raising, and followed by the point made by distinguished representative of Indonesia. Support both. Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias.
Many thanks to all delegations that have taken the floor in such a productive way this morning. That brings us to the end of this meeting. When we come back, we will open the floor to any delegations which wish to make additional remarks that have not yet been made on these paragraphs. But we do have a significant number of important proposals for further paragraphs, and we'll continue so that we can close consideration of this cluster by looking at civil society's concerns and opening the floor to them. And then we'll look to produce a summary of our work before we move to the general obligations sections. Many thanks to you all. This meeting is adjourned.